The first time I realized something was strange about my husband, he was calmly eating pie while another alpha was trying very hard to intimidate him. Before that night, I would have described Evan Mitchell as the gentlest Omega alive. He once bumped into our dining chair and whispered, "Sorry," before realizing I had heard him. He needed me to open pickle jars, claimed grocery bags weighing more than 15 pounds were an alpha responsibility, and routinely stole my sweatshirts because apparently marriage had erased the concept of personal property. I loved every ridiculous inch of him. My family was less impressed. They thought Evan was too quiet, too slender, too soft-spoken, and his scent was so faint that some people barely noticed it. At Sunday dinner, my cousin Mark watched Evan carry a bowl of mashed potatoes to the table and asked, "Ryan, you seriously let him carry that?" Evan looked down at the bowl. "I believe I can survive the potatoes." I nearly laughed into my water. Mark did not. "I am just saying, some Omegas are naturally more delicate." My jaw tightened. Evan touched my wrist beneath the table. It was his usual signal for please do not turn dinner into a family crisis. I let it go. Then Uncle Grant arrived. Grant was the kind of alpha who treated every room like it had elected him president. He was broad, loud, and deeply committed to opinions nobody had requested. Halfway through dessert, he started questioning Evan about why he still worked at a bookstore instead of staying home. "Ryan earns enough," Grant said. "An Omega like you does not need the stress." Evan calmly cut another piece from his apple pie. "I like books." "That is not really my point." "I know." Something about Evan's answer irritated him. Grant leaned closer, and I felt the atmosphere change. Alpha pressure. Subtle, but deliberate. My shoulders tightened immediately. Mark stopped talking. Even my mother glanced toward Grant with irritation. Evan kept eating pie. I waited for him to stiffen, lower his eyes, move closer to me. Anything. Nothing happened. He took another bite. Grant increased the pressure slightly. Evan reached for his coffee. "This pie is really good," he told my mother. She blinked. "Thank you, sweetheart." I stared at my husband. Grant finally leaned back, looking confused. Evan noticed me watching him. "What?" "Nothing." "You are doing your thinking face." "I do not have a thinking face." "You absolutely do." 10 minutes later, we were driving home through quiet suburban streets. Evan curled comfortably in the passenger seat, wearing my navy sweatshirt. I kept glancing at him. "Okay," he finally said. "What did I do?" "At dinner. I complimented your mother's pie. I thought that was considered polite." "Grant was using alpha pressure on you." Evan turned toward me. "He was." I waited for the joke. It never came. "You seriously did not notice?" I thought he was constipated. I laughed so suddenly I nearly missed our turn. "Evan." "What?" He was making a very intense face. "That was alpha pressure." Evan looked genuinely thoughtful. "Huh. One word. That was all." Then he turned back toward the window as if we had been discussing the weather. I should have laughed it off. I should have accepted that maybe Grant was losing his touch. Instead, I remembered every time Evan had seemed strangely calm around dominant alphas. Every moment I had assumed he was simply too gentle to react. At the next red light, I looked at my husband again. He caught me staring and smiled. "What?" For the first time in 3 years of marriage, I did not know how to answer. For the next few days, I told myself the dinner incident meant nothing. That worked beautifully until Tuesday morning, when Evan looked up from his coffee and said, "Do not take Jefferson Avenue today." I paused with one shoe on. "Why? Take Oak Street instead. That adds 12 minutes. 11 if you stop treating yellow lights like personal challenges." I stared at him. Evan calmly buttered his toast. "Is there construction?" "Maybe. Maybe." He gave me that harmless little smile that had apparently become suspicious overnight. "Humor me." I did. An hour later, my coworker called to say Jefferson Avenue had been closed after a major water main break flooded several blocks. I immediately texted Evan. His response arrived 30 seconds later. Lucky guess. I stared at those 2 words until they became irritating on a spiritual level. Thursday brought another one. I was reviewing a potential logistics contract at home when Evan walked behind my chair carrying laundry. He glanced at the company name on my screen and stopped. "You are not signing with them, right?" "Why would you ask that?" "I do not like them. You buy books for a living. And yet I contain multitudes." "Evan." He sighed. "Just wait 48 hours. 2 days later, the company appeared in the news over an internal financial investigation, and our legal department suspended negotiations. When I confronted Evan, He was watering the basil plant over the kitchen sink. Lucky guess, I asked. Excellent instincts. That is just lucky guess wearing a tie. He kissed my cheek, handed me the watering can, and escaped upstairs. By Saturday, I had started keeping a mental list. Evan knew when my mother was about to call before my phone rang. He could tell when a salesman was exaggerating within 30 seconds. He once predicted exactly which neighbor would complain about our recycling bins and at what time. None of those things were impossible. Together, they were becoming annoying. That afternoon, I stopped by Evan's bookstore near closing. The place smelled like coffee, old paper, and cedar shelves. Evan was behind the register helping an elderly customer find a mystery novel. He looked completely ordinary. Soft gray sweater, ash blonde hair falling over his forehead. Gentle smile. My husband. Then the front bell chimed. A white man around 40 entered wearing an expensive charcoal coat. Evan looked at him once and went still. The man wandered toward the history section without touching a single book. Evan finished helping the customer, then quietly said to me, "Ryan, give me 5 minutes." "Why?" "He is not here for books." I looked toward the stranger. "How do you know?" Evan did not answer. The man approached the counter. His eyes remained fixed on Evan. "I heard someone here could help me find something difficult." Evan's expression became unreadable. "We have a search terminal." "That is not what I mean." The warmth disappeared from Evan's face so subtly I almost thought I imagined it. The stranger lowered his voice. "Does Cipher still solve impossible problems?" My stomach tightened. Evan did not look surprised. That was the part that frightened me. He simply folded his hands on the counter and said, "You have mistaken me for someone else." The stranger smiled. "Have I?" I looked at my husband, waiting for confusion. There was none. Evan had known the man was not there for books before the man had spoken a word. And for the second time that week, I realized my husband knew something he had absolutely no reasonable way of knowing. The stranger kept smiling at Evan as if the two of them were sharing a joke I had not been invited to understand. I stepped closer to the counter. "Who is Cipher?" Evan did not look at me. "Nobody." The stranger tilted his head. "That is disappointing. You should leave," Evan said. His voice was quiet, but something about it had changed. The softness was gone. This was not the man who apologized to furniture or declared pickle jars my responsibility. "I only need an answer," the stranger said. Then asked the right question. "Fine. Do you remember Philadelphia?" Evan studied him for 2 seconds. "You flew here this morning. You expected someone else to meet you. They canceled, and now you are improvising." The stranger's smile faded. I stared at my husband. "How could you possibly know that?" Evan ignored me. The stranger adjusted his coat. Evan noticed. "Your airline tag is still attached to your carry-on. The coffee receipt sticking out of your pocket has a Philadelphia airport logo. You checked your phone 4 times since entering, but you never typed anything, so you are waiting for instructions. And you have walked past the same shelf twice without reading a title." The stranger glanced down at himself as though his clothing had betrayed him personally. Evan folded his arms. "You are not here because you found me. Someone sent you." Silence. "Who?" Evan asked. "I cannot tell you." "Then I cannot help you." "Cipher would have." "Cipher is not here." The stranger looked toward me for the first time. "Does your husband know that?" Evan's jaw tightened. I felt the question. Land between us. "Know what?" I asked. The stranger returned his attention to Evan. "Interesting." Evan leaned slightly forward. "You have 30 seconds before I call mall security." "You will not." 25. "You always were difficult." 20. The stranger hesitated, then reached into his coat slowly and placed a plain business card on the counter. "No name. Just a phone number. When you change your mind." Evan did not touch it. The man walked out. The bell above the door chimed, absurdly cheerful in the silence he left behind. I waited until he disappeared past the window. Then I turned to Evan. "Customer service?" Evan exhaled. "Ryan." "No." You knew where he flew from, why he was here, what he was waiting for, and apparently you have a secret nickname that sounds like you solve international mysteries before breakfast. It is complicated. That phrase has never improved a marriage conversation. For half a second, his mouth twitched. Then the expression vanished. Evan picked up the business card using a tissue, studied it, and placed it inside an envelope beneath the register. "I noticed that too. Why did you not touch it?" "Habit." "From what?" He looked at me. There was something almost apologetic in his blue-gray eyes. "A life I do not live anymore." My frustration softened just enough to become something worse. Concern. Are you in trouble? Evan answered immediately. No, am I? This time he paused. Only a second, but I caught it. Evan. He reached across the counter and took my hand. His fingers were warm and familiar, which made everything else feel even stranger. Go home, he said. I will close early and meet you there. Absolutely not. Ryan. 3 years of marriage. You know better. His thumb brushed once across my knuckles. Yes, he murmured. That is exactly what worries me. And suddenly I understood that Evan was not afraid of the stranger returning. He was afraid of me discovering why the stranger knew him. I drove home with Evan beside me, which was apparently my compromise between respecting his request and completely ignoring it. He spent most of the 20-minute drive looking through the passenger window while I tried not to interrogate him at every red light. By the time we reached our house, I had accumulated approximately 40 questions and enough patience for 3. Who is Cipher? I asked as soon as the front door closed. Evan placed his keys in the ceramic bowl by the entryway. I told you. It is complicated. Great. Explain it complicatedly. He almost smiled. Almost. Ryan, I need some time. You had 3 years. That stopped him. I immediately regretted how sharp it sounded, but I did not take it back. Evan looked toward the kitchen, then quietly removed his coat. There are things about my life before you that I never expected to matter again. They matter when strangers walk into your bookstore asking for someone you apparently used to be. He nodded once. That is fair. It was such a reasonable answer that it somehow made me more frustrated. That night, Evan went to bed early. I stayed downstairs with my laptop and did something I had never imagined doing to my husband. I searched for him. Evan Parker, 27 years old. Former address. School records. Employment history. At first, everything looked ordinary. Then I noticed the dates. His verified history began a little over 5 years ago. Before that, almost nothing. No clear high school record. No college listing I could confirm. No old hometown newspaper mention. Even his medical history seemed strangely thin. I searched until after midnight, increasingly aware that I knew which cereal Evan hated, but apparently not where he had been at 19. The next morning, I checked the storage closet while looking for tax documents. That was my excuse, anyway. Behind an old box of Christmas decorations, I found a narrow envelope with no label. Inside was a photograph. Evan looked younger, maybe 21 or 22, standing in a formal conference room beside several older alpha men in expensive suits. He was not smiling. He was not dressed like the quiet bookstore employee I knew. His posture was straight, expression focused, eyes almost unervingly alert. I turned the photograph over. For words were written across the back. Cipher. Do not underestimate. My pulse quickened. Ryan. I turned. Evan stood in the doorway. His gaze dropped immediately to the photograph in my hand. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I was looking for tax records, I said, which might have been the least convincing sentence I had ever produced. Behind the Christmas decorations? Taxes are unpredictable. Evan closed his eyes briefly. You searched for me last night, too. I stared at him. How do you know that? Your laptop was open to a public records database this morning. Of course it was. Even during a marital crisis, my husband remained irritatingly observant. I held up the photograph. Who are these people? People I used to work with. Doing what? Silence. Did Evan Parker even exist before 5 years ago? His expression softened, and somehow that frightened me more than denial would have. Not the way you think. I looked again at the handwriting. And Cipher. Evan walked toward me slowly. That was what they called me. Why? He stopped a few feet away. Because I was very good at understanding things other people could not. People too. His eyes met mine. Especially people. I thought about Jefferson Avenue, the contract, the stranger at the bookstore, every prediction I had dismissed as instinct. Then another question surfaced, colder than all the others. Did you understand me before we met? Evan did not answer. And that silence told me I had finally asked the right question. For several seconds, Evan said nothing, and I discovered there is a special kind of silence reserved for married couples when one person knows the answer could change everything. Yes, he finally said. My stomach tightened. You knew things about me before we met? Not what you are imagining. That would be easier to believe if I knew what I was supposed to imagine. Evan looked down at the photograph in my hand. I worked as an analyst. The people in that picture collected information for private clients. Companies, families, organizations. My job was to find patterns. What kind of patterns? behavior, decisions, relationships, risk, and you were good at it. A tired smile touched his mouth. Too good. He explained that he remembered details most people forgot. A pause before an answer. A repeated phrase. The way someone checked a door twice or avoided a particular name. He could take dozens of tiny observations and build a surprisingly accurate picture from them. That explains the stranger, I said. And Jefferson Avenue? City maintenance notices, weather reports, and a neighborhood post about dropping water pressure. The company investigation, public filings, executive departures, and 3 unusually nervous press releases. I stared at him. You could have just told me you read too much. You married a bookstore employee. That should have been obvious. Against my better judgment, I laughed. Evan did too, and the tension in the room loosened for the first time in days. He told me Cipher had been a professional nickname, nothing more mysterious than that. He had left the work because he hated treating human beings like puzzles. The bookstore was real. Our house was real. Our marriage, he insisted, was real. I wanted to believe him. More importantly, I did believe that he believed what he was saying. Over the next few days, things softened between us. Evan stopped pretending his observations were lucky guesses. I stopped looking at every strange detail like evidence in a trial. On Friday morning, he adjusted my tie before work, frowned at it, and said, "Your meeting will run 20 minutes late." Prediction? Your boss likes hearing himself talk. That is not analysis. That is common knowledge. He smiled. That evening, I brought takeout home from Evan's favorite Thai place. We ate on the couch, argued over a game show, and for several hours I almost forgot there was ever a mystery between us. Then I woke shortly after midnight and realized Evan was not beside me. A faint voice came from downstairs. I followed it quietly and stopped halfway down the staircase. Evan stood in the dark kitchen with his phone pressed to his ear. "No," he said softly. "Ryan believes I left all of that behind." My hand tightened around the railing. A pause. "Because that is the truth." Another pause. Evan turned slightly away from me. He still does not know why I chose him. Everything inside me went still. The person on the other end said something I could not hear. Evan closed his eyes. And I intend to keep it that way. He ended the call. I stepped backward before he could see me and returned upstairs, suddenly wide awake. I had spent the entire week thinking I had finally been given the missing answer. Lying beside the empty space where my husband should have been, I realized Evan had only given me the answer to the wrong question. I did not mention the phone call the next morning. Instead, I watched Evan make coffee while pretending my entire understanding of our marriage had not been rearranged at 1 in the morning. He handed me my mug. 2 teaspoons of sugar. I know. Evan paused. You usually say thank you. Thank you. His eyes stayed on me for half a second too long. Of course he noticed. My husband could probably detect emotional instability from the way someone buttered toast. I went to work, accomplished almost nothing, and came home determined to stop guessing. Evan was still at the bookstore, so I opened the storage closet again. I hated doing it. I hated even more that I knew there was something left to find. Behind the photograph envelope sat a small flash drive I had ignored before. On my laptop, most of its contents were ordinary archived documents until I found one protected folder. I tried our anniversary. Nothing. Evan's birthday. Nothing. Then, feeling ridiculous, I entered the date we first met. The folder opened. My name appeared immediately. Ryan Mitchell. I stopped breathing for a second. There were public records, company references, family connections, photographs from before Evan and I had officially met, and pages of behavioral notes. Patient under pressure. Avoid status displays. Protective without obvious dominance. Frequently challenges expected alpha hierarchy. I heard the front door open downstairs. Ryan. Evan called. I stayed seated. A minute later, he entered the room and saw my laptop. His expression told me everything before he spoke. You found it. You studied me. Ryan, listen. Was I a client? No, a target? No, an assignment? Evan hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than either answer. I stood. Did you marry me? Because you loved me? Or because you were studying me? His face went pale. Neither. I stared at him. That might be the worst possible answer. I know how it sounds. Then improve it. Evan stepped closer, but stopped when he saw my expression. I married you because you were the first person I could not predict. I almost laughed. That is supposed to make me feel better? No. It is supposed to be true. He looked toward the screen. When I first noticed you, I was still working as Cipher. Your family appeared in material I was reviewing. I expected you to behave like every profile suggested you would. And you did not. His voice softened. You disagreed with powerful alphas when there was nothing to gain. You apologized to an Omega employee after interrupting him, even though nobody else cared. You helped people when you thought nobody was watching. I looked at the photographs again. But you were watching. At first. Those words landed heavily. Evan continued before I could respond. Then I started looking for reasons you would disappoint me. That sounds romantic. I was terrible at romance. A tiny, helpless smile appeared and vanished. Fair. He took a slow breath. Every person I analyzed eventually became a pattern. You kept breaking yours. I became curious, then interested. Then I made the mistake analysts are never supposed to make. What mistake? His blue-gray eyes met mine. I started hoping my conclusions were wrong. The anger in me did not disappear, but something underneath it shifted. Why? Evan swallowed. Because if I could not predict you, maybe my future did not have to be predictable either. I looked at the file, then at the man I had shared 3 years with. For the first time, I understood why Evan had chosen me. What I still did not understand was what choosing me had cost him. For the first time since this started, Evan stopped trying to explain himself like an analyst and simply told me the truth like my husband. We sat at the kitchen table until nearly midnight, my laptop closed between us, 2 cups of coffee growing cold. Your family was never my assignment, he said. They appeared in research. Connected to people my organization worked for. I noticed you because you did not fit what the data predicted. So I was basically an interesting spreadsheet. Evan winced. That description is upsettingly accurate. Very romantic. I told you I was bad at this. Despite myself, I smiled. Then he told me what happened next. He watched me longer than professional curiosity justified. He saw me refuse promotions that required treating employees like numbers. He saw me argue with my father when he dismissed an Omega manager's opinion. He saw me spend 40 minutes helping a delivery driver find a missing shipment even though I had already clocked out. None of those things were extraordinary, I said. They were to me. Evan's voice became quieter. Where I worked, kindness always had an objective. Information always had a price. People did things because they expected something in return. You kept doing things that gave you nothing. I looked at him across the table. And that made you leave? Not immediately. Evan traced one finger around the rim of his mug. First, it made me curious. Then it made me question everything. Cipher had been valuable because he could reduce complicated people into understandable patterns. Evan Parker was created when he decided he no longer wanted to. He changed careers, buried the professional identity, and took a job surrounded by books because, according to him, fictional people were considerably less exhausting than real ones. And the bookstore? I asked. Completely real. The pickle jars? He became suspiciously interested in his coffee. We are not discussing the pickle jars. Evan, continue with the emotional revelation, please. I almost laughed again. Then the question I had been avoiding finally surfaced. Did you arrange our first meeting? No, his answer came instantly. That was the part one could never predict. He told me he had already left the organization when we met at a neighborhood coffee shop 3 years ago. I had accidentally taken his drink, complained that someone had ruined my coffee with oat milk, and then realized the cup had his name on it. You looked personally betrayed by dairy. Alternatives, Evan said. It was a confusing morning. You apologized 4 times. I was raised correctly. His smile faded into something softer. That was when I knew I wanted to know you as myself, not as Cipher. I looked at the man across from me and finally understood the difference. Cipher had observed me. Evan had met me. Evan had laughed at my terrible jokes, married me, stolen my sweatshirts, remembered my coffee, and built a life with me. Why did you never tell me? I asked. His eyes lowered. Because I was afraid the moment you knew how our story began, you would believe none of what came after was real. I reached across the table but stopped before touching his hand. I am still angry. I know. I still need time. Take it. But I believe you loved me. Evan looked up. Relief crossed his face so openly that it answered more than words could. Then his phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at the screen, and every trace of relief disappeared. What? I asked. Evan turned the phone toward me. The message contained only an address, a time for the following afternoon, and 6 words. Final offer. Come alone, Cipher. I looked at him. You are not going. Evan was silent. That was when I realized he already intended to. I knew Evan planned to go alone because I had been married to him long enough to recognize the expression he wore whenever he had already solved a problem without consulting anyone affected by the solution. Absolutely not, I said. Ryan, that tone works on bookstore customers. It does not work on your husband. Evan placed his phone face down. They want me, not you. That is supposed to reassure me? They are offering a clean separation, a new identity, permanent confidentiality, and written assurance that you and your family will never be connected to my former work. I stared at him. And what do they want? He hesitated. Me back. The answer settled heavily between us. You were going to accept. I was going to listen. That is analyst language for yes with extra steps. Evan stood and carried his untouched coffee to the sink. If returning guarantees you are left alone, it is the logical choice. There it was. Logical. The word that had apparently governed his entire life before me. You know what your problem is? I asked. He turned. I suspect you are about to tell me. You keep predicting everyone. That was literally my job, including me. His expression changed. Ryan, you decided I would be safer without knowing your past. You decided I would reject you if I knew the truth. Now you have decided I would rather lose my husband than deal with whatever inconvenience comes from keeping him. This is more than inconvenience. That is not the point. I stepped closer, stopping across the kitchen island from him. You can predict everyone except me, right? Evan said nothing. Then stop predicting what I want and ask me. For once, Cipher had no immediate answer. Evan simply stood there, blue-gray eyes fixed on mine. What do you want? He finally asked. You. His breath caught. That is not practical. Neither is marriage. Have you seen what we spend on throw pillows? A laugh escaped him before he could stop it. Good. I needed Evan, not the analyst calculating probabilities. The next afternoon, we went together. The address led to a quiet conference room inside a downtown office building, about 20 minutes from our house. The man from the bookstore was waiting with a woman in a charcoal suit. No threats, no raised voices, just paperwork arranged neatly across a polished table. They offered Evan exactly what he had described, a fresh professional identity, complete separation from his old records, and protection for anyone connected to his current life. In exchange, Cipher would return as a consultant. The woman pushed a folder toward him. You understand why this is the safest option. Evan looked at the documents. Then at me. I did nothing. That mattered. For 3 years, I had stepped forward whenever I thought my Omega needed protection. This decision belonged to him. You once told me every person eventually becomes predictable, the woman said. Evan's eyes remained on mine. I was wrong. He pushed the folder back. I am not returning. She studied him. Because of him, Evan smiled slightly. Because I finally learned there are choices worth making, without knowing the outcome. We walked out together 10 minutes later. Outside, afternoon sunlight reflected from the glass buildings, and Evan stopped on the sidewalk as if he had forgotten what came next. You really would have let me choose either way? He asked. Yes. Even if I chose them. I considered that. I would have complained extensively. He laughed. Then his hand found mine. I spent years believing uncertainty was dangerous, he said quietly. I squeezed his fingers. And now? Evan looked at our joined hands. Now I think it might be the reason I stayed. 3 weeks later, I discovered the greatest mystery in our marriage had nothing to do with Cipher, secret files, or private organizations. It was the pickle jar. Saturday morning found us in the kitchen, sunlight pouring through the windows while I made coffee, and Evan assembled sandwiches for a picnic my mother had somehow convinced us to attend. Things between us were better. Not magically perfect, but honest in a way they had never been before. Evan told me when he noticed patterns instead of pretending they were lucky guesses. I stopped treating him like something delicate that needed to be protected from every uncomfortable situation. We were learning each other again, which was strange considering we had already been married for 3 years. Pickles, Evan said, opening the refrigerator. Top shelf. I see them. I turned back to the coffee maker. Behind me came a quiet pop. I froze. Slowly, I looked over my shoulder. Evan stood at the counter holding an open pickle jar. One hand. No struggle. No dramatic sigh. Nothing. He looked at the jar. Then at me. Evan. Ryan. Did you just open that? He glanced down as if another person might have done it. Possibly. You have been handing me pickle jars for 3 years. That is a strong accusation. You once woke me up because you could not open one. I wanted a sandwich. You said your wrists were delicate. His mouth twitched. That might have been an exaggeration. I stared at him. You have got to be kidding me. Evan finally laughed. I liked when you opened them for me. That stopped me. Beneath the ridiculousness was something unexpectedly simple. Not every secret had been strategy. Not every weakness had been calculated. Sometimes my husband just liked being taken care of. I walked over and took the jar from him. For the record, I am still opening these. Good. But now I know you are committing fraud. Marital delegation. Fraud. By Sunday dinner, my family had apparently decided nothing had changed. Uncle Grant watched Evan carry a serving dish and made another comment about me letting my Omega do too much. 3 weeks earlier, I would have answered before Evan could breathe. This time, I looked at my husband. He caught my eye. I smiled and kept eating. Evan calmly set down the dish. Grant, do you remember our last dinner? Of course. You tried to intimidate me. Grant shifted in his chair. I would not put it that way. Ryan explained it afterward because I genuinely did not notice. My mother covered a laugh with her napkin. Evan smiled pleasantly. So I think I can manage the serving dish. Grant suddenly became fascinated by his potatoes. Under the table, Evan found my hand and squeezed it once. I squeezed back. Nobody else noticed. That was fine. Some things did not need an audience to be real. For years, everyone around us had assumed Evan was easy to understand because he was quiet, gentle, and an Omega. I had made the same mistake, only with more confidence because I was his husband. Now I knew about Cipher, the observations, the hidden history, and the mind behind those innocent blue-gray eyes. But I also knew the man who stole my sweatshirts, remembered my coffee, loved terrible mystery novels, and apparently conducted a 3-year conspiracy involving pickle jars. Everyone had thought Evan was the simplest person in the room. I was the one lucky enough to discover just how wonderfully wrong we had all been.